Johnny Boobang, and welcome to yet another episode of Life Lived in Purpose. Now, today I will be talking about the journey of purpose and how it is nagging. Don't get me wrong, I will explain the nagging part a bit, but it will make sense as I go further on in this topic. So, yes, the journey of purpose is nagging, and here's why. So, God wants you to truly find your purpose and to walk in it wholeheartedly. Trust me, He will, as we like to say, bring heaven down on earth to get you to walk totally and completely in your purpose and your calling. So, it's true. You really don't have to fight the process like many of us do all the time. You just have to be quiet long enough to understand with your heart what's next on your particular journey with God. Now, for many of us, it doesn't quite go that way. We don't want to do God's will sometimes. We want to do our own will. But God is gracious and He allows us to do our will. And you know what happens when we get finished doing, what we thought or expected for our own lives? That's when we realize that whatever we were doing sometimes it may not have been His will. And that's when we sometimes tend to be miserable, or we can become frustrated and sometimes angry with life and the world and everything in between. And then that's when many of us will go to God and knock down His door and asking Him for something as similar as a redo, or to ask what was happening or why your life is not the way it's going or anything that could happen. Does it sound familiar to you? Well, it's very familiar to me because I actually did the same thing. If you've already listened long enough to my story, then here's a recap. I'll just go back over it for you. I went headstrong for the life that I previously thought I had because that was what I had dreamt up for myself. Also, I was at the time fighting with self-esteem issues and thought that a doctoral degree as a pharmacist would make me somehow invincible in the eyes of others. But when I got all of that, when I achieved this doctoral degree and everything that came with it, I was miserable. I was miserable. I was going through the emotions and finally begging God for a redo or a what's next scenario, as most of you would have said. So my redo, it came in a different light. It wasn't the redo that I was expecting, at first. And I kind of rebelled. Yes, I rebelled myself against it for some time until I said, you know what? I'm finally willing to surrender to the calling God had on my life instead of doing what I thought I wanted to do for my life. So I finally decided to do that and to do His will and not my own. But here's the thing, throughout the process, I can tell you that breaking free from the confines of, your self-will, it was actually quite liberating. Even just not having to have that strong self-will anymore. I found it as it being freedom instead. Because here's how I see it. When you decide to rather do things God's way, which is technically the way you were created to be, if you think about it, and to live, it's quite actually freedom. You're actually living how you were already created, how God had envisioned your life to be. And when you get to that point, you will understand the difference and you will feel somewhat at peace and somewhat free to live and express yourself the way God had already envisioned for you. So how does God usher His children into their promised land, I call it, or as we all call it as Christians? It's actually through nagging. I know it sounds crazy, but trust me, God will usher his kids into what he needs them to get into through nagging. So I don't say this casually or even lightly, because I believe God will do whatever he needs to. Like I said before, he will bring heaven down on earth to get you your to walk in your purpose that he has planned for you. So God will actually do whatever he needs to do to get his children to get into their ordained purpose that he had already planned over their lives. Now remember, your purpose is anything. It's not just a church ministry or serving in the church or anything like that. It could be anything. It could be acting, singing, being called to work in healthcare, or whatever it is. It's totally unique to you, and it was how God had originally created you to be. So embracing your unique calling is it's a great accomplishment. It will give you so much more freedom with your life and yourself. There are also no more going through the emotions of life, like, the mundane feelings that we may have here or there, or just sometimes dragging yourself each and every single day to go to a job you quite honestly despise. But purpose is so different. It's different because you wake up each and every day inspired to do more than before. Like, purpose is just how you are, how you were created to want to live the life that you have, to be inspired to do more, to dream more, and to live more for God. So it's the excitement of doing what you love to do. And that exactly is what I call purpose. So, yes, for God to get through to some of us, to ensure that we are going in the right direction, we will get some nagging thoughts, and they may not go away as easily as you may think, until we decide to get those things that we hear quite often, that sometimes we think it's ourselves or maybe it's the enemy, but in itself, it's always God calling and challenging us and trying to get us to walk into the direction that he wants us to go into. So yes, nagging for a life as a child of God, it's normal. So what does that look like? You may be asking. So let me get into what nagging is briefly and how you can identify that in your own lives as well. Okay, remember, when you nag somebody, I know women can relate to this a little bit more. But when you nag someone, you're constantly reminding them to do something repeatedly. Does it ring a bell? The constant reminding of, hey, get this thing done, get this, do this. So that's how it is. It's over and over again. You're required to do the same action step. So God does that in order to remind you and to get you yourself to go on the path that he probably was already calling you on, or you have known for some time that you need to do something, accomplish something. And that's how God reminds us. He constantly brings it to memory every time so that we can take some action steps that we need to take in order to see our purpose come to pass. So that's how God speaks to us, one of the ways directly. Whether it's through your thoughts, through others, sometimes will remind us of the same things that he may have been telling us, through dreams and vice versa. So when he needs you to do something, for example, you may have a thought about the action step. Yes, you may have probably brushed it off or several times over. Many of us do. We'll brush things off. Or we even blame the devil, like, we sometimes like to do. Or even talk ourselves out of doing it a million times over. But here's the difference. The nagging sometimes never go away until you decide to get what it is God is calling you to get done. So here's an example from my own life. God wanted me to start a podcast. Now, I already had it in my thought process way back that I don't want to do any podcast whatsoever. Nope, not for me. I'm not a podcaster, not now and not ever. But here I am. I'm continuing on with my life, and I just started this YouTube channel, and I wasn't ready to take on anything else at this time. But as I continued, I kept hearing to start a podcast. Now I know I already told myself, nope, I'm not going to do it. I don't want to do podcasting. That's not my thing. I'm already committed to doing YouTube, and that was already pulling me out of my comfort zone. But here I am, once again, starting a podcast, and the thought, it just never went away. I wrote it down several times just to tell you how much I was going back and forth with it. I spoke about it several times. People even mentioned it to me several times. Why don't you start a podcast? But finally, after hushing it all away and trying to get rid of it and saying, nope, God is not calling me to it, I finally felt it actually was Him calling me to reach another platform for His message to be heard. And so I started a podcast. Now, was it nagging? For me, yes, it was. It will also be the same in your life as well. God will remind us constantly, about things that we need to get done, things that we need to accomplish, and just so that we can get on the perfect path that He has planned for us. So, what do you need to do? Listen carefully. Listen carefully to those constant prompts, those constant naggings that God has done to tell you to get to where He's calling you to get to. Be vigilant about just following it and stepping out. And once you do, I can guarantee you things will just unravel. And the more you do it, it will make sense later on why He was nudging you, why He was calling you to pick up or to do something that you may not have even thought about doing before. So also, another thing is don't ever let fear stop you from doing anything that God is calling you to do. And most times it's the fear. Remember, I've done a video about this before, about fear can interfere sometimes with some of the things that God might be calling us to. So fear, yes, it can stop us sometimes for taking those action steps that God may have been prompting us to do. We have to be able to also decipher fear and to take a hold of what those fears are and work through getting rid of them, instead of actually hanging on to them. Let's say, for instance, for a lot of us, God may have called you to write a book. And for you, fear has kept you for so long from writing that book that that God had placed on your heart. You have it in your journal. People have been reminding you. But you're afraid. You're afraid of taking that action step and stepping out. If you understand that fear is what's preventing you from actually stepping out, then try to find ways to combat that fear. That may be something like taking a baby step, right? Just tell yourself you're going to spend the time to write 1 block a day. And then keep chipping away at that until you find yourself breaking out of that fear and you have accomplished that book that God is calling you to write. So those are other things that we need to understand about God. For example, for me, once again, podcasting. I thought podcasting too was also going to be technical. That was my fear. It might be technical. It's probably tedious. Oh, I have to format videos. I have to do editing, and I have to put it on all the podcast channels. So that was what the fear was for me, even with having to start a podcast. Also, I even thought I had to go and do voice training and buy expensive equipment. The things that we think about whenever we are told to do something that God is calling us to do. And the list of excuses just kept going on and on and on. And it took a while for me to get the fear away and just get up and do it. However, I'll tell you this. Once I got that past that list of things that I could or could not do, and just keep going through all the emotions of having to start a podcast, um, I realized that half of the things I was worrying about, it didn't really matter. Like, it wasn't that complicated. I actually started a podcast with no money up front, my phone, and a $12 pop filter from Amazon. Now, I kid you not, it doesn't take a lot of things that I thought before, all this fancy equipment and everything that I would need to get started on a podcast. And so I started my podcast with what I had already available to me in hand. And I didn't have to go spending, doing voice training or anything I thought that was required of me to start a podcast. And that's what I'm trying to tell you. Sometimes the things that we fear are actually something that we may not need to fear. And we need to just step out and get what God is calling us to do done. Now, I can tell you, I actually love podcasting now. I actually enjoy doing it now, and getting into the flow of things and how it's done and learning more about podcasting. So that fear was squashed. And now I get to once again spread my message on a new platform, on another global stage, so that others too can learn about how to find purpose and to discover or rediscover your purpose and identity here on earth. Now, this may not be your scenario. This is mine. But do understand that God will also help you to navigate, through what he wants you to do and to get it done in any time and season of your life as well. So for some, it's probably the constant nagging to finally leave that job. Hey, you may have written your resume a year ago and you're still waiting there and not wanting to leave that job. He's already told you long before to just get up and go to where he's calling and leading you to go to. He may have told you to move to that city or start that business or get that license for that job. Whatever it is you may have feel pulled to do, just be confident. Be confident in listening and obeying that voice. Also, don't be afraid if you made a mistake. A lot of us are scared to actually step out because they think that, you know what, if I step out, I may fall. I may make a mistake. But this is the thing. God is graceful and he will always redirect your steps, no matter whatever you do. That's the thing. He already knows us. We will sometimes pick the wrong step, the wrong path. But here's the thing. It's better you step out not knowing what's going to happen, and then God will help you to redirect it, than sitting there in fear and not doing anything. And then you're there limiting your life and limiting your journey of going on your purpose-driven journey. So just remember, God is a loving God. He's faithful. He will always redirect your steps. He will always bring you back on the right path that he has called you to be on. And so I say, who does that? Who does that? Nobody but a God who wants to see his children thriving and surviving in this world. So you know what? You just need to be brave. Be brave as a child of God. Be bold. Don't get afraid of the naggings. And remember, God will always take care of you. I'm sure many of you have testimonies of lifetime of things that God have done in your life that it shows how good he is, how faithful he is. And as such, trust him on your path, trust him on the journey that he's taking you on. And always remember that even if you took the wrong step, God will always, always, always redirect your steps. So thank you once again for tuning in to another episode of Life Lived in Purpose. Do also join me on my podcast at Life Lived in Purpose. You can listen to the similar episodes as well. So they're available My podcast is available on Spotify, Anchor, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio, and Castbox. So if you haven't already also grabbed a copy of my book, A Balanced Life, Moving from a Dysfunctional Life to a More Purposeful One, please do so. This book was written to help anyone who has ever struggled with dysfunction in your life and you thought that it was normal. But remember, dysfunction, it's not normal, not with a life lived for God. And it rather signifies that you are on the wrong path that God may be calling you on. God wants us to live balanced life so that we can showcase his glory here on the earth. Also, be sure to get a copy of my memoir, I Am Who God Says I Am. Always be inspired to live the life God has planned for you to live. The link for both books, as always, is in the description box below. So until next time, I do thank you for watching. Bye.